Okay, wonderful. Thank you everyone for attending. Let me read you a little bit something about Amber's background and what she's going to be performing for you tonight. Amber is a relatively new storyteller, but the way she tells feels quite old. She has been performing personal stories, folklore, and fairy tales in the oral tradition for a little over a decade now. Her favorite sorts of tales to tell reside in the intersection of real life and fairy tale, because she believes that real life can be both. This performance will use folklore and personal narrative to explore how we change, how we make room for awareness, grief, and power that we may have been too scared to hold as children, and how the water holds us as we do. And with that, everyone, I would like to turn the room over to Amber.
Thanks again, Tiffany. And thanks to everybody for sticking it out. It's really lovely to be with you. The first time that the lake spoke to me, I believe what she said was, "This is going to hurt." It was the 24th of July, 2013. That month had been extremely hot, so hot that my friends and I decided that we didn't care how dirty the water was, we'd cool off anywhere. As I was climbing off of the rock jetty into the water, I slipped. My thighs and back grated against the big jagged stones that lifted the jetty above the waterline before I splashed into the lake, a jangled heap of bones and hair flying out in every direction. I swam out as far as I could into the lake anyway. The water was so heavy with silt and toxins that when I submerged my hands beneath it, I couldn't see them anymore. As I floated in sharp and tremendous pain, questions about how the lake had become the way that it was gently trickled through my mind. I watched the questions ebb and flow, and when my friends were ready to leave, I limped out of the lake to the car and ultimately back inside my steaming college home. I've been trying to listen to the lake more since then, but it doesn't always come easily. Her perspective is different from mine, you could say. More vast, more impartial, more eternal. She doesn't seem to care about the things that I care about. She isn't moved by religious creeds or ideas about the way things should be. She isn't moved by grievances or grudges or my sense of right and wrong. Truth, the way it is, comes easily to her because she allows it to flow, to swirl freely. What reason would water have to fear the truth? Stagnation is not her friend, but even this she can abide. She tells me that for those who would hear her voice, she asks a price. I too must allow myself to flow. She tells me that she'd like to speak and she'd like to be heard. So let her voice flow through you if you can. If her flow presses up against an internal levee or a dam, ease it open. As people of the Gaelic-speaking nations say in their tongue, don't merely listen to the story that she tells. Let the story move through you. When every person who could remember what has happened here is gone, when the books have disintegrated, and when every grandchild with their carried whispers has aged and returned to the stars, I will remain, and I will remember. I will not tell you my name, not now. If you will speak to me in my language, I will tell you what I remember. But I will not tell you so that you can save me. I will not tell you so that you can undo what has been done. I will not tell you so that you can stoke old grievances or re-inflame the abuses of the past. My story is given to those who wish to hear. I am the water. If you want to hear my story, you must bring to me your broken heart, and you must let me wash it clean. This is going to hurt. The day that I met Mary Murdoch Meyer, she sat me down across from her at the table. She looked down the barrel at me, all the way through me, it seemed, and she said to me, "Who are you?" The question reverberated through my chest. Suddenly, I didn't know the answer. She pulled out sheets of blank family trees, put a pen in my hands, and gestured at the empty brackets. I quickly scrawled out what I knew. My mother's name, Rachel Murdoch, her father, Dick Murdoch, his father, Blaine Murdoch, his father, Nelson Murdoch, and finally his father, Joseph Stacy Murdoch. Mary placed her tree beside mine. With her finger, she traced the generations in reverse order, starting with our shared progenitor, Joseph Stacy Murdoch, to his son, Franklin Murdoch, to his son, Glenn Murdoch, to his son, Colin Murdoch, to Mary, his daughter, the woman who sat in front of me. "We are family," she said. "You have Scottish blood, same as me." Mary couldn't have looked more like a Shoshone woman to me. I didn't think I looked all that Scottish either. Although we shared Joseph Stacy Murdoch in common, we had different foremothers. I descended through his Scottish wife, Lizzie. She descended through his Shoshone wife, Pranetta. I'm sorry that we have to be connected through this man. In my culture, we are taught to honor our elders and our ancestors, but this man. She trailed off, but I understood exactly what she was saying. This man, Joseph Stacy Murdoch, our ancestor, he was not the type one should honor. I remember your ancestor, this Joseph Stacy Murdoch. I remember the first time we met. His hair and his beard were wild, scraggly, and unkempt. He was hungry, famished. He pulled his boots off and dropped them against the shore before he waded into me. My fish swam near him, curious. His friend smacked his hand against my surface and sent a cascade of droplets flying toward Joseph Stacy Murdoch. For a moment, he grinned, and then he playfully ducked under my waterline. Once beneath the surface, I could feel the grief, rage, and loneliness that coursed through him. Although I saw him, he did not see me. He was much changed the next time he came to my shores. I've known about Joseph Stacy Murdoch for what feels like my whole life. My mother kept a book about him in my childhood home. I grew up on Shoshone Avenue, if you can believe that. I was ravenous for the written word as a child. Any book I could find, I quickly devoured. So I picked up his biography quite early. Minutes passed before I slammed the book shut again. Anytime we came to Utah to visit my mother's family, I would ask about him. Why? Why did he do that? Why did he do that? Why in God's name did he do that? My relatives all had different answers, and none of them were very satisfying. Years passed. Ultimately reviled by what I had read, I vowed that he would be no kin of mine. I might share his blood, but it wouldn't be by choice. I would never, never, ever be a Murdoch, not after what he did to Pranetta. Yes, Pranetta. I remember the girl. They called her Nettie. Her mother called her Second. When she was small, she would waddle with her hand in her mother's down to the freshwater springs that are nestled in the hills around my lake. When she grew a bit older, her mother would send her alone to gather the water. She stopped coming to my springs after that winter, the winter of many sorrows. She was almost never alone after that. I would bless her as I could through the raindrops. I would reflect her image back to her in those stolen moments at the river. She was different from Joseph Stacy Murdoch in every way. Her hair and skin were dark. They shone the way my surface does when it sits beneath a blanket of stars. She did not withhold her feelings or keep them locked away below the surface. She gave me every tear she had. They would mingle with the rain. They would patter against the river. I wanted her to come back to me, to come home, but the Murdochs kept her away. It's all right. Everyone comes home to me eventually. I think Joseph Stacy Murdoch was a storyteller too. His stories weren't told to enlighten or to entertain or to commune. He told stories to cover his tracks. There are too many tall tales, the flat kind that leave a bad taste in your mouth, around why and how Pernetta came into the family. None of them adequately explain why it would be that a grown man, after adopting a little girl and raising her for over a decade, would then marry that girl before she reached the age of 14. People say we shouldn't judge the past. They say we should treat history like it's a foreign country. How applicable is that adage when history is only one generation removed from us? What about 5 generations? Some things are simply wrong. No amount of historical context can make them right. Besides, people have known that this is wrong for far longer than 5 generations. I've heard this story many times, spoken in many different tongues. The June suckers in my lake say they heard this version from the trout, who heard it from the salmon, who heard it from the bear, who heard it from the hawk, who heard it from the seal, who swam in waters far, far north of here, waters from a much colder region of the world than my lake beds and hot springs. I'll tell you now this story, but the price will be the same as before. A drop for a drop. Let me offer you this tale. I think it can help. When Mary asked me who I was, I looked inside and I saw a void. As a woman of Shoshone descent, it was clear to me that Mary shouldered great burdens, and yet she knew who she was. Mary knew her history. I couldn't say the same thing about myself. My identity was waterlogged, practically drowned in the culture swamp that is the 21st century. Who were my people? How did I get here? Where did I come from? I was so alienated from the land. I felt like I was a stranger here. As a matter of fact, I was. If you've ever looked into a seal's eyes and thought, there's something about this animal that is almost human, well, your ancestors thought so too. Where they came from, there was a word for these human seals. They were called selkies. It was said that once a month, when the moon was full, all of the lady selkies would swim to the surface and remove their seal skins, revealing their true human form. They'd revel and frolic and dance on the water for the night. And then as the sun rose, they'd put their seal skins back on again, dive under the water, and return home until the next month. Well, one month, a lonely fisherman was out on the water in his dinghy past sundown. He heard women's voices lilting and giggling over the waves. Curious, he quietly rowed toward the sound. He hid himself behind a large rock and watched the Selkie women. Knowledge that he was unwelcome rippled through him, but he stayed right where he was. He had found the cure to his loneliness, or so he thought. One of these women, that's what he wanted. When he was sure that none of the women were looking, he reached his hand out from behind the rock and grabbed one of the sealskins. He hid it under the seat in his boat and waited. As the sun rose, one by one, the Selkies retrieved their sealskins and dove back below the waves. One Selkie was left, quivering, frightened, and alone. The fisherman approached her. "I've lost my coat," she cried. There, he said. "I'll help you. Come into my boat. I'll take you home, warm you beside my fire, feed you my food. Be my wife, and I will take care of you." Resigned, bereft of her skin, and seeing no alternative to climbing into the stranger's boat, the Selkie did as she was instructed. There's no one living in my family tree anymore who remembers what it felt like to be at home in a place. There's no one who remembers what it means to really belong to a particular landscape. I've cried out a few times to the ancestors I know must be beyond the stories that are available to me. Someone must have known how to live with the earth without harming it. In time, the Selkie and the fisherman had a child. a little girl, called Saoirse by her mother. The Selkie loved her daughter, but her arrival couldn't stop what had already been put in motion the night the fishermen stole the Selkie's pelt. The longer the Selkie was kept away from her home, the more dried out she became. As the months turned into years, the Selkie's hair became brittle, her skin flaky, and her eyes hollow. Her voice, once robust and melodic, was reduced to a whisper. By the time her daughter was 7 years of age, the Selkie's situation was dire. If she could not put on her coat once more, transform again into her seal form, and return home to the sea, she would wither up and die. I crave the women especially. I want to link myself to them, plant myself in their circles and see myself in their salty, steely eyes. They knew how to live. They must have known how. These women, my ancestors, they knew seasons, simplicity, sovereignty, ritual, didn't they? Somewhere in my ancestry, the women had to know these things. There's a pulse in my veins that tells me that they. I want to feel their scratchy wool against my skin and hear the bleating of their lambs in my ears. I want to bleed with them and cry with them and break bread with them. How did the women move and laugh and celebrate? What did they sing? What did my ancestresses call God? I wish I could drop an anchor into their stories. I wish I could know them as they knew themselves. Although the fisherman never revealed the truth about the seal pelt to his wife, she knew that it was he who had stolen it. Her repeated rebuffed pleas for him to return her coat to her had left her heartbroken and subdued. But her daughter, Saoirse, well, she had some cleverness. One weekend, while her father was gone on a fishing trip, Saoirse snuck into his boat shed. Concealed under a loose board, she found her mother's sealskin. It was in tatters. It was so thin and fragile, it was barely held together anymore. Gently, Saoirse brought the coat to her mother. Selkie was so diminished that she had no tears left to cry at the sight of her brittle, disintegrating coat. Saoirse led her mother down to the water's edge. Saoirse dunked the seal pelt into the ocean, hoping that would revive it. No matter how long she held it under the waves, it wouldn't revert back to its former self. It had no gloss, no sheen. How could her mother wear this? The Murdochs, my Murdochs anyway, have been here in North America since the 1680s. They lived in Boston and New York for 6 generations, and then they immigrated to the American West, where they've been for 6 generations more. I've read that in Scotland they roamed alongside the MacDonald clan. The earliest records of the Murdochs place them on the island of Wist in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. The name Murdoch means sea warrior, which has led some historians to conclude that they were originally Norse, Vikings. It's interesting because the stories that come from the island of Wist say the same thing about the Selkies, actually. According to some myths, they were the children of a cursed Norse king, bound to the form of seals until the curse, whatever it was lifted. What do I do, mother? Saoirse asked the Selkie. Saoirse held her breath. It had been so long since she had heard her mother's voice. The Selkie fished the pelt out of the water. She placed it against the sand and suspended her hands above it. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. With eyes full of mourning, she looked at her daughter. A song was what was needed, but Selkie could not speak, and she could not sing. Saoirse had heard the song before. Her mother had sung it to her as a lullaby many years ago. She closed her eyes and tried to remember. It seemed to be out there, somewhere on the waves. Saoirse opened her mouth. It happened the morning after my grandpa died. It was a strange synchronicity. The night he passed, I taught a class for women about reclaiming their voices. The next morning after I got the news, I found myself on YouTube, absentmindedly clicking around. A recommended song popped up, one I hadn't seen before. The description said that it came from the island of Whist and that it was about selkies. It moved through me with the force of a tidal wave. My ancestors had heard me. They were speaking back. Hi, 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 haramima nadarai. Smedex and G, Charles Smedex and G. Hikaga Knights of Charnost and Louis. Galet Jenyagu Kruikai. Hi, 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 haramima naradai. Smishania neviyoin. Gumbialak memunaskena. Gun medikikia nagmabuelo. Benua salmio hidela. Hi, hi, hi. Hi, 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 haramima naradai. He can smear up, he can druch, he kakiani will sing. He can bratan hara huai. Galaloin haglashamei joy hi 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 haramima nararai. As Saoirse finished singing her song, she was amazed to see that the sealskin coat was no longer on the sandy shore. A rogue wave had come in and scooped it up, pulling it out to sea. A microburst opened up above the water. The winds roared and lightning flashed. Rain poured out of the sky over the girl and her mother. Almost as soon as it had begun, it was over. The clouds broke open and a ray of sunlight found the sealskin again, as a gentle wave brought it right against the selkie's ankle. The selkie picked it up. Its energy pulsed through her hands, coursed up her arms and down her navel, all the way down the strands of her hair. She was transformed, alive again. Saoirse ran to her mother for the first time, afraid. The selkie knelt down and embraced her daughter. The waves laughed at them. I have to go home now, my child, but I will never be out of reach. You are the daughter of land and sea. My home is your home too. Come to me when you are ready. As she dove away, the waves sent one more gift to shore. A newly born sealskin pelt for Saoirse. I think I can see why the lake wanted to tell me that story, at least the first part. She was right, it is the same story. My third great-grandfather, Joseph Stacy Murdoch, was like the fisherman in the tale. Bernetta, his Shoshone daughter turned wife, was like the selkie. Unfortunately, that's where the similarities end. Pernetta never got to go home. Not literally, not even metaphorically. Pernetta never got to be free, and the method through which she was acquired was far less benign than a stolen sealskin coat. Swim deeper, my child. Swim deeper. Swim deeper. I'm in so deep already, I'm drowning. No one listens to me. No one cares. Doesn't matter if they don't listen. You are water like me. Water flows where it flows, whether or not anyone is listening. But they need to know what happened. It wasn't right. It's hurt people, generations of people. It's hurt the land, it's hurt you. If somebody doesn't do something, all of this, it's gonna end. I'm afraid that if I try to tell them what happened, that they won't believe me. I'm afraid that they'll throw up the same walls of disassociation as their ancestors, and that we'll just have to continue on in the same way, hurting without acknowledging that we're hurting. Why can't we give it up? Why can't we give up our safety or whatever? It's noxious. It's choking us out. I can't bear it. Then let me tell it. I was there. I know this story too. So I decided to give up the ruse. You're not going to hear from me for a little while. I'm going to kick back and float, maybe go for a swim. I'm going to try to just listen. I recommend the same to you. I have been here for thousands of years. I have watched the rise and fall of many species, many tribes, many peoples. I offer my waters to all to quench their thirst, to cleanse themselves, to play in and to enjoy. I am love and I am power. I am life and I am death. I am mystery and I am what is known. I was here long before you arrived, and I will be here long after you have parted. I flow in truth, and so I know the truth. I will tell you this. To love humanity is to know humanity. It's to love all of humanity, even the things they do that you believe are wrong, immoral, or harmful. If you can think of anyone who does this more completely than I'll wait. I have received your plastics. I have received your pollution. I have received your secrets. And now I wish to receive your grief. Please, do not ignore me. Do not ignore me. Only 5 generations ago, your people came to my shores. They were of a tribe I had not seen before, not a tribe bound together by blood, but a tribe bound together by perspective. They called themselves the More Goods because they believed that they could be more good than their fathers. They had a book that they believed was more good than the book that had come before. Perhaps it was. They had ideas that they believed were more good than the ideas that had come before. Perhaps they were. What they wanted to produce in the world, they said, was more good. But somewhere, subtly, a small change happened. More good became more goods. They wanted more land, more wives, more children, more good, more good, more good. They were much like starved wolves in this way. The more goods had been harmed and hunted by other peoples. They'd been chased to my shores. They arrived famished, cold, and scared. It was many generations earlier that their ancestors had forgotten how to live with the land. The Morgoods were like their ancestors. They no longer knew how to feel satiation. They did not know when enough was enough. They did not know how to stop. Among the Morgoods marched your ancestor, Joseph Stacy Murdoch. He was a wolf among wolves, small in stature but zealous, willing to do anything for the cause, willing to do anything to slake his hunger. When they arrived here in these lands, when they heard about me, the lake, all my fish, my reeds, the good farmland around my edges, my rivers and tributaries, this is where they wanted to build their home. I was a rare jewel in a vast desert, a blue freshwater lake shining amongst miles of sand and sagebrush. There was only one problem. My people already lived on my shores. They named themselves after me. I was the lake where the water flowed over the rocks, and they were the people of the lake where the water flowed over the rocks. They were the rock water carriers. They numbered in the thousands. They came to my shores every summer to dance and sing and fish. I nourished them for hundreds of years, for many, many generations. They were like your distant Murdoch ancestors, only they still had their sealskin coats. In the year you know as 1850, tensions between the Morgoods and the Rockwater carriers reached a boiling point. The Rockwater carriers had said, no, you may not come to these lands, you may not come to these waters. There is not enough for the two of us. The Morgoods made promises in the light that they did not intend to keep in the dark. On February 8, 1850, a band of militiamen from the Morgoods attacked the Rockwater carriers. Although even after 200 years, no one would use the word genocide to describe what happened, that is surely the best word in your language for what occurred. That winter became known amongst my people, the beavers, fish, fowl, and muskrat, as the winter of many sorrows, because in my language the truth was never concealed. The tears that fell into my water, they could not lie, neither could the blood. The Morgoods chased the Rockwater carriers up my rivers through the mountain canyons, and they chased them out onto the great ice floes at my surface. With their gunpowder and ammunition, they took the lives of more than 100 Rockwater carriers over the following 2 weeks. The Morgoods only lost one man. What happened here on my shores in February of 1850 ignited 20 years of continued killings between the Morgoods and the Rockwater carriers. Those that survived were taken far away from my shores, out to the forest land. Some of them were forced to live amongst their captors. This was how Pranetta came to live in the Murdoch home. Nothing Joseph Stacy Murdoch ever did successfully slaked his hunger. Not his trek to my shores, not his killing of the Rockwater carriers, not his kidnapping of Pranetta, not his marriage to her. He had forgotten the stories of his ancestors. He had forgotten that to be alive again, he must go and find his sealskin coat, sing over it, bring it back to life, and return home. He and many others spread their woundedness around. Of a truth, this story is the story of multitudes. It's not just the story of the people of my lake, it is the story of the people of every river that runs through this continent. Every sacred hill and mountain, every forest and dale. Millions of people were killed so the hungry, the famished, the desperate, and the violent could enact their ideas on this land. In the generations that followed, once my waters were in their control, the Morgoods revealed even more of their woundedness. Their children used me for a dumping ground. They pumped me full of sewage and sawdust. They killed my fish. They sullied my waters. They desecrated me. Even now, many of their grandchildren and great-grandchildren wish they could erase me. They may have forgotten the stories. They may have never been told how I became the way that I am. But somewhere in their bones they remember. They would rather I disappeared then they be called upon to feel the depths of their grief. So, Amber, what would you do? Well, given such a question, what answer could I summon up but one? Hi, 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 Smedex and G, Charles Smedex and G. Gikegenianeriek, Gebet, Nights of Charnost and Louis, Galichenyagu Kruikain. Hoi, hoi, ahoy. Hoi, hoi, ahi. Hoi, hoi, ahoy. Haramiman, hararai. Smishania, navy, Was that so hard? And so you see, as I said, water does not lie. You are ready now to hear my name. Timpanogos. 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 Your ancestors took my name and they used it for the mountain and their highway and their car shops and in their high schools and their temple and their festivals. But Timpanogos, that's my name. And that is the name of me, the water. You call me Utah Lake, but I call myself Lake Timpanogos. And so you see, the story I gave you before, it's all true. To move forward, Amber, you must become like Saoirse, the child of father and mother, the child of land and sea. You must learn to swim in the depths, and you must learn to walk on the earth. There was a reason the Selkie named her daughter Saoirse. Saoirse means freedom. This is true freedom, to know life and death, to know truth and lies, to feel everything that there is to feel. True freedom is going home. Thank you so much.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I was pausing because I wanted to make sure that you were actually finished.
Yeah.
I echo Lorelai. That was powerful, wonderful storytelling. I feel we're so honored to hear this story that I think many of us have within us. Most of us in North America, whether we like it or not, come from colonizers and ancestors who committed genocide. But we don't have to be what was before. So thank you for sharing that with us. I encourage you to go into the comments. Everyone is thanking you and telling you how amazing it was. The downside of Zoom is having everyone unmute to clap is a disaster. And all of the sound. So you'll have to read all of the thank yous. But that was beautiful.